Our relationships change the course of our lives, but can they change history? I'm the Affair Archivist, and in this episode, we're delving into the infamous affair between Oscar Wilde and Lord Alfred Douglas, a love that inspired brilliance, ignited scandal, and ended in ruin. On Valentine's Day 1895, The Importance of Being Earnest premiered at the St. James Theatre in London. It was one of Oscar Wilde's greatest artistic and professional triumphs. The performance was sold out, and all of London's high society were in attendance. Though he was one of England's foremost writers of the day and at top of its artistic milieu, Wilde was full of anxiety. Not because he was worried about how the play would be received, but because he feared one particular person may be in attendance. Wilde was on edge because the 9th Marquess of Queensberry had purchased a ticket. The nobleman was waiting outside of the theater with a box full of phallic-shaped vegetables in tow, determined to humiliate Wilde on his triumphant evening. Luckily, the aristocrat's ex-wife warned Oscar that he had purchased a ticket. It was canceled, and he was denied entry to the theater. Still, Wilde wrote, Queensberry lingered around the theater for 3 hours, chattering like a monstrous ape. At that point, Wilde seriously considered bringing charges against the Marquess. He had been stalking and harassing him for years. This move, however, brought about his downfall and permanently drove a wedge between himself and the young man he loved, Queensberry's son and the cause of his hatred towards Wilde, Lord Alfred Douglas. The affair between Oscar Wilde and Lord Alfred Douglas was full of passion and intensity, and ignited a scandal that Wilde would never recover from. Both men were true to themselves when society made it a crime to do so, bringing about the destruction of their love affair and lives. Douglas has since been portrayed as selfish, tempestuous, immature, uncaring, and the true cause of Wilde's downfall. But is this the whole story? Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin, Ireland, on the 16th of October, 1854. His family was well off. His father, Sir William Wilde, was a lauded surgeon, and his mother, Jane Francesca L.G. Wilde, was a poet and Irish nationalist that wrote under the pen name Speranza. He had an older brother and a younger sister, as well as 3 half-siblings born before his father's marriage to his mother. Oscar was well off and received an excellent education and had an early love of reading. He was a speed reader and often went through several books a day. His parents allowed the children to sit at the dinner table with the adults, contrary to the customs of the time, and he took in their conversations about politics and philosophy. He endured the first tragedy of his life when his little sister, Isola, died of a fever in 1867. He visited her grave often and wrote a poem dedicated to her. Wilde enrolled at Trinity College in 1871. When another student laughed at his poetry, he slapped him in the face. He also attended Oxford, where he struggled to fit in, and adopted a British accent. He was determined to make something of his life. I wanted to eat of the fruit of all the trees in the garden of the world, and that I was going to go out into the world with that passion in my soul. And so, indeed, I went out, and so I lived. At university, Oscar became fascinated with the aestheticism movement and became a major figure in it. Aestheticism touted beauty above all in art, literature, and music. While at Oxford in 1876, Wilde's father died, leaving a meager inheritance and a lot of debt behind. This foreshadowed Oscar's financial issues to come. After graduating from Oxford in 1878, Wilde moved to London and quickly ingratiated himself into the cultural elite of the city. His charm, captivating voice, and knowledge of art made him popular. In 1881, he published his first collection of poems. He met Constance Lloyd at a tea party hosted by her mother. Constance was 22 years old and also from Dublin. After their meeting, it is said that Oscar told his mother he would marry Constance one day. She was beautiful, shy, and came from money. A combination of these factors likely attracted Oscar to her. They shared a love of beauty and the arts as well. He proposed in 1883, and they were married the following year. They had 2 sons, Cyril and Vivian. In the late 1880s, Oscar honed his literary talents by working as a magazine editor. After Constance had been pregnant and given birth, Oscar admitted his attraction to her diminished. When Wilde met 17-year-old Robbie Ross in 1886, he claimed he was seduced by him. This was Oscar's first sexual encounter with a man, though he had been attracted to other men in the past. After his affair with Ross, Wilde felt joy, delirium, that he had never experienced before. However, in Victorian England, all same-sex contact was illegal, and gay men had to take drastic measures to maintain secrecy or risk prison. 1891 was a particularly significant year in Oscar's life. He published his first and only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. The text depicts the corruption of a young man at the hands of an older one, something Wilde would someday be accused of. He also published a collection of essays and 2 collections of fairy tales. As he was reaching his creative peak, Oscar met Lord Alfred Douglas, better known as Bosie, when a mutual friend brought him to a party at his house in Chelsea in June. Douglas was a fan of Dorian Gray and was excited to meet Wilde. Oscar was hypnotized by Douglas's pedigree and good looks. He was 20 years old, while Wilde was 36. Douglas was the 3rd son of the Marquess of Queensberry, born on the 22nd of October, 1870, in Worcestershire. His father was often absent from the family, carrying on affairs with other women. He sold off the family's estate in the late 1870s and moved to London, which caused tension within the family. Douglas's mother spoiled him. She called him Bosie, meaning little boy, which eventually evolved into Bosie, a lifelong nickname. He said his mother spoiled him frightfully, and as a result he had a hard time making friends at school. He attended Winchester School at his father's insistence, even though there were more elite schools closer to where the family lived. Bosie was bullied and likely sexually abused by his classmates during his time at Winchester. Later in life, Bosie blamed his experiences at school for corrupting him. "I bitterly resent that I was robbed of my virtue and my innocence in my helpless boyhood by being put into a community which one of its most distinguished sons compared to hell. If I had escaped untarnished from Winchester and Oxford, it would have been a miracle, and I would have been a saint." His parents divorced in 1887 after Lord Queensberry suggested his wife move in with him and his mistresses, and brought one of his lovers to a party where she was in attendance. 2 years later, Bosie enrolled at Oxford and began writing poetry. Though he and Oscar immediately clicked when they met, Bosie was not physically attracted to him, given his age. Still, the pair went out for dinner a few days after. Oscar gave him a signed copy of Dorian Gray, with the inscription, "Alfred Douglas, from his friend who wrote this book, Oscar, July 91. Bosie claims that Oscar came on to him during their dinner, but he rejected him. He was more interested in courting men his own age, but wanted to be around Oscar because he was famous. Around this time, Oscar began hiring rent boys to satisfy his sexual desires. This term refers to male prostitutes who were often in their teens or early 20s and from working-class backgrounds. Their clients tended to be wealthier and prominent men like Oscar, who could not be open about their sexuality. Soon after meeting, Bosie wrote to Oscar pleading for help. He was being blackmailed. A letter he had written to one of his peers containing compromising information was found by their parents and could be exposed. He recommended Bosie speak to George Lewis, his friend and an attorney, who told Bosie to pay the blackmailers £100, a sum Oscar paid. He was warned that Bosie could be trouble, seeing as he expected him to solve all of his problems while giving little in return. Oscar did not heed this advice. Nonetheless, Bosie was grateful for Oscar's help, and it brought them closer together. The young poet was taken out of this tedious world and into a fairyland of fancy, conceit, paradox, and beauty by the power of his golden speech. The affair began in January of 1892. They had dinner together in London and went back to Oscar's empty house on Tite Street. Bosie recalled, "He succeeded in doing what he wanted to do ever since the first moment he saw me." Though Bosie was sexually experienced at this point, in his memoirs, he claimed to be more naive about sex than he probably was, saying that Oscar treated him as an older boy treats a younger one at school, and added what was new to me: "He sucked me." He signed off one of his letters to Oscar, "Your own loving darling boy to do what you like with." That summer, Oscar went on vacation to Norfolk with Constance and his sons. Bosie telegrammed, asking to stay for the night. Instead, he extended his welcome to the whole vacation. When Oscar stayed behind to finish a play and his family left, Bosie also remained, even though he had hoped to have the week to himself to finish his work. News of Oscar and Bosie's affair soon began to circulate around London. The Marquess of Queensberry was disturbed by this information, as Wilde was rumored to be gay before he met Bosie. Queensberry wrote to his son, urging him to cut ties with Wilde. Bosie respectfully replied that he would not end his friendship with Oscar. In his next letter, Queensberry was angry. He called his son a fool and a baby and threatened to cut off his allowance. Their relationship steadily worsened from there. In November, Oscar took an extended vacation to Babbacombe Cliff. He was there alone with his sons, as Constance was in Italy. He brought along other male companions and carried on affairs with them. He was also intimate with some of the hotel staff and rent boys during this period. After their encounters, he gifted many of these men silver cigarette cases. It was dangerous. Oscar was famous, and he was being cavalier with his sexual liaisons, despite the unjust illegality of homosexuality. Yet he was addicted to the danger. Tired of being on the heights, I deliberately went to the depths, in the search of new sensations. What the paradox was to me in the sphere of thought, perversity became to me in the sphere of passion. It was like feasting with panthers. The danger was half the excitement. Not wanting to be left out, Bosie joined Oscar in Babbacombe. He was attempting to finish his play, A Woman of No Importance, which was of course complicated by Bosie's presence. Oscar said the situation was combining the advantages of a public school with those of a private lunatic asylum. Towards the end of the trip, in February 1892, Bosie had the first of many rage spirals in front of Oscar. He screamed at him and left Babbacombe. It is unknown what sparked this tantrum, but it deeply unsettled Oscar, and he swore to never see Bosie again. However, this promise did not last long. Bosie telegraphed, begging him for his forgiveness. Oscar capitulated, imploring Bosie to treat him better. "Bosie, you must not make scenes with me. They kill me. They wreck the loveliness of life. I cannot see you, so Greek and gracious, distorted by passion. I would sooner be blackmailed by every renter in London than have you bitter, unjust, hating. I must see you soon. You are the divine thing I want, the thing of grace and beauty, but I don't know how to do it." When they both arrived back in London, they stayed and dined at the Savoy together, drinking heavy amber-colored, indeed almost amber-scented champagne. They stayed at the hotel for a month, racking up hefty bills. Oscar and Bosie had sex with each other and a succession of rent boys during the stay, again opening themselves up to the danger of exposure. When page boys delivered Oscar messages, he kissed them, then tipped them generously, showing just how little he cared about the dire consequences of getting caught. One rent boy, Alfred Wood, attempted to blackmail Oscar. Bosie was reckless and took Wood with him to Oxford. There, Wood stole several compromising letters from Wilde and other lovers, though he claimed he found them in the pocket of a suit that Bosie had gifted him. In one of the letters, Oscar described Bosie's rose-leaf lips and how they were suitable for a madness of kisses. When Constance came home from Italy, she asked him to return home. He joked that he had been gone for so long he forgot their address. This hurt Constance deeply, though she remained unaware of Oscar's behavior for several more years. As his new play premiered to great reviews and attendance, Oscar was again threatened with blackmail. A random man on the street handed him a copy of the Madness of Kisses letter. Later, another man approached him on the street, asking him if he read the letter and demanding money. Oscar said he was too busy to respond to his requests. Wilde transformed the letter into a poem and planned to publish it in Bosie's literary magazine at Oxford, The Spirit Lamp. This undermined the blackmailer's attempts to use the letter as leverage. When yet another blackmailer appeared at his home in reference to the same letter, he said that he would send him a copy of the magazine it was to be published in. Though Oscar maintained his composure, this experience left him shaken. In the summer of 1893, Oscar rented a cottage on Thames at Goring at Bosie's behest. He planned to write his next play, An Ideal Husband, that summer, but was often distracted by the excesses of he and Bosie's lifestyle. Bosie had just failed to graduate from Oxford, despite being offered the opportunity to take a private exam to earn his degree. Bosie didn't have any plans for the future, except to live extravagantly on his allowance. He hired 8 servants and stocked the cottage with plenty of champagne. A revolving door of men visited them. Bosie lounged on the lawn naked, and the men hosed each other down to cool off. Rumors began making their way to London through the house servants as to what Bosie and Oscar were doing at the summer cottage. They were also spending nearly £500 a month to stay there. Oscar asked Bosie to translate one of his plays, Salome, from French to English, but when he did a shoddy job, they argued, leading to a major row in which the only thing they could agree upon was that they were both ruining each other's lives and should separate. Bosie left in a rage. As was his custom, he telegrammed Oscar a few days later begging for forgiveness, which Oscar gave to him. Tensions between Robert Ross and Bosie were high from the beginning. Both of them felt Oscar was theirs, especially Ross, who fell in love with him first. The acrimony between them worsened and almost led to Oscar's exposure when Bosie stole one of Ross's lovers, Claude Dancy. Bosie slept with him twice and paid Dancy to sleep with a woman while he watched. When he returned to school in Belgium 3 days later, administrators investigated the reason for the teenager's tardiness. They found that Dancy had been with Bosie and Ross. Both of them went to Bruges to reach a settlement with Dancy's parents and convince them that since their son participated in sex with men, he would also be subject to prosecution if Ross and Douglas were put on trial. All incriminating letters were returned or destroyed, and the affair was kept quiet. It was yet another close call, and it led Oscar to write Lady Queensberry, suggesting that her son go abroad. She agreed as long as Oscar promised he would not visit him. He reassured her that he did not want to see her son again, which we know was a lie. While Bosie left England on good terms with Oscar, after he was absent for a time, Wilde's feelings for his lover soured. Bosie wrote a succession of letters imploring him to let him back into his life in March of 1894. He went as far as to ask Oscar's mother and Constance to speak with Oscar on his behalf. Though Constance did not like Bosie or the influence he had over her husband's life, she convinced him to write back to Bosie and forgive him. He finally relented when Bosie sent a telegram from Paris that contained a subtle allusion to suicide. He met him in the City of Light and spent 8 extravagant days with him. They traveled back to London together. Bosie intended to stay only for a brief time. He was offered a job as an attaché in Constantinople, but he ultimately turned down this opportunity, ramping up tensions between him and his father. Queensberry stalked Oscar and Bosie around town and eventually came upon them having luncheon at Café Royal. He was furious, but did not make a scene in that moment. Instead, he wrote to Bosie to tell him how he really felt about his association with Oscar and to threaten to disown him. "I am not going to try and analyze this intimacy, and I make no charge, but to my mind, to pose as a thing is as bad to be it. With my own eyes I saw you both in the most loathsome and disgusting relationship as expressed by your manner and expression. No wonder people are talking as they are." That June, Oscar returned to his home to find an unwelcome guest waiting for him in his library, Queensberry. Oscar confronted him about his accusations. In several letters to Bosie, Queensberry called Oscar a sodomite and claimed that Constance was going to divorce him. He demanded an apology. Queensberry refused, stating that the contents of his letters were meant to stay between him and his son. "Do you seriously accuse your son and me of sodomy?" He replied, "I don't say you are it, but you look it, and you pose as it, which is just as bad. The discussion devolved from there. Oscar claimed Queensberry cursed at him and waved his hands in an epileptic fury. He said if he caught him and his son together in public again, he would thrash him. Oscar retorted, I don't know what the Queensberry rules are, but the Oscar Wilde rule is to shoot you at sight. He kicked him out of his house. Queensberry later claimed that Oscar showed him the white feather, meaning he acted in a cowardly manner and did not fight him. Bosie once again added fuel to the fire when he telegraphed his father after the incident at Oscar's house. What a funny little man you are. Queensberry responded, If you send me any more such telegrams, or come with any impertinence, I will give you the thrashing you deserve. Your only excuse is that you must be crazy. If I catch you again with that man, I will make a public scandal in a way you little dream of. It is already a suppressed one. I prefer an open one, and at any rate I shall not be blamed for letting such a state of things go on. The rest of Bosie's family tried to dissuade him from seeing Oscar, knowing that it was causing drama for the entire family, but he refused, devoted to him, and perhaps thriving on the drama their relationship was causing. Oscar contacted his friend and attorney George Lewis to help him with Queensberry's harassment, but Lewis was already representing Queensberry in his divorce proceedings and could not advise him. Queensberry had married a 17-year-old girl, but the marriage quickly fell apart and was not consummated, as she claimed that Queensberry had a genital malformation and was impotent. Oscar contacted another law firm, which sent Queensberry a cease and desist letter, and asked him to apologize for his accusation. He refused, and continued stalking Oscar at his favorite restaurants, hoping to catch him and Bosie together and to cause a public spectacle. He even hired private investigators to stalk his son and Wilde. Bosie and Queensberry continued to quarrel. When his father sent back his letters unopened, Bosie sent him a postcard informing him that he was carrying a loaded revolver with him at all times, and that Oscar was in his rights to sue him for libel and get him sent to prison. He added, I think if you were dead, not many people would miss you. The revolver accidentally discharged at the Berkeley Hotel one evening, causing another mini scandal that needed to be covered up. Queensberry called Oscar's lawyers, saying that if Bosie continued carrying the weapon, he would call the police. Bosie heeded this threat, but Queensberry still reported his son to the authorities. Oscar was caught in the middle of the feud between father and son and had no idea how to pry himself out of it. He had more to lose than both Bosie and Queensberry, given his fame and status, and his lack of an aristocratic background. People began turning on him, especially other men, leaving the room when he came in, discouraging young artists from admiring or meeting him. When a luncheon was held in honor of his new work, few men were in attendance. He was once again advised by many who cared for him to stop seeing Bosie. Why should I cringe to this madman? In the summer of 1894, Oscar set out to write the importance of being earnest at a more modest vacation home on the Esplanade at Worthing. By August, Bosie had joined Oscar and his family, after Oscar wrote that he was bored. Constance was unhappy that Bosie had come, but he did not care. Both men went sailing with teenage boys, and Oscar may have had a sexual encounter with one of the young men. During the vacation, several of Oscar's friends were arrested for homosexuality in a raid, though no charges were filed. Towards the end of the summer, the pair traveled to Brighton, where Bosie came down with the flu. Oscar nursed him back to health and read to him at his sickbed. When Bosie recovered and Oscar succumbed to the same flu, Bosie refused to care for him and left for London. Oscar was entirely alone, without care, without attendance, without anything. When Bosie returned to Brighton after a few days, Oscar confronted him. He once again flew into a rage, accusing Oscar of being selfish, telling him that he should not expect him to sacrifice his fun to be with him while he was sick. Things seemingly blew over that evening, but when Bosie returned to his room the following morning, he continued to verbally abuse Oscar. It got so bad that he dragged himself out of bed and to the hotel common area just to avoid Bosie's wrath. Bosie stole whatever money Oscar had in his room and left. When he celebrated his 40th birthday a few days later, Oscar received many happy birthday letters, and one from Bosie that read, "When you are not on your pedestal, you are not interesting. The next time you are ill, I will go away at once." This time, Oscar was serious. He never wanted to see Bosie again. It was a great relief. I knew that for the future of my art and life would be freer and better and more beautiful in every possible way. Ill as I was, I felt at ease. The fact that the separation was irrevocable gave me peace. He returned to London on October 19th, assured that his resolve to never see Bosie again was solidified. However, tragedy struck. Bosie's brother and heir to the Queensberry title, Francis, was shot and killed in a hunting accident. Many speculated as to whether this was actually an accident or something more nefarious. It was rumored that Francis was gay and that he was having an affair with Lord Rosebery, the Prime Minister. Queensberry may have threatened Rosebery with exposure if he did not arrest and prosecute Oscar for his relationship with Bosie, accusing him of corrupting his son and heir as he believed Oscar corrupted Bosie. This, however, was never substantiated, and Bosie believed his brother committed suicide. Oscar was horrified and knew he had to contact Bosie to give him his condolences. A few days later, they met up at Oscar's house, forgetting the row in Brighton. It was a great blow to Bosie, the first noble sorrow of his boyish life. Though he tried, Oscar could not quit Bosie. In the aftermath of his son's death, Queensberry, not exactly a pleasant person before, became even more bitter and determined to ruin Wilde's life. He resented that his family would not take his side in the Bosie conflict, and wanted to goad Oscar into suing him for libel so he could expose him. After the importance of being Ernest's premier in early 1895, Oscar knew something had to be done about Queensberry's stalking and harassment. Bosie was supportive of this idea, but when Oscar criticized him for bringing a rent boy to his hotel room, he had another tantrum. He brought the rent boy to another hotel, on Oscar's dime. Oscar contemplated leaving London for Paris, but his luggage was under lock and key at the Avondale Hotel for unpaid bills. Queensberry could not be charged for the incident outside the theater at the premiere, because no one would give a witness statement for the police to base their warrant for arrest on. Bystanders did not want to get involved in the escalating drama. Oscar did not know what to do. 2 weeks later, on February 28th, Oscar arrived at the Albemarle Club and was informed a note was left for him. It was Queensberry's card. The inscription was only partially legible, but it contained the name Oscar Wilde and the word sodomite, though it was misspelled. The note had been left out in the club where anyone could read it, and Queensberry later claimed it said, "For Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite." Oscar asked Ross to meet with him as soon as possible, stating, "My whole life is ruined by this man." When Ross arrived at Oscar's hotel, Bosie was already there. The men decided it was time to bring libel charges against Queensberry. The burden of proof would be on Queensberry and his lawyers. They would have to prove that the statement was true, and that it was in the public interest for this information to be revealed. Oscar, Bosie, and Ross believed that Queensberry would not be able to prove both points. The sexual allegations could be denied, and Bosie would refute that Oscar had corrupted him, or that they had ever had sexual contact. He was determined to get his father imprisoned or sent to an insane asylum. Oscar's lawyers were confident that he would win the case, but he balked at the costs he would incur taking this to court. Bosie assured him that his family would pay for his legal fees. He was not the only one who wanted to see his father's downfall. A warrant was issued for Queensberry's arrest, and he was charged with criminal libel. George Lewis represented Queensberry. Part of his defense hinged on the barely readable wording on the card. Queensberry claimed, since he said posing as a sodomite, he was not officially defaming Wilde. This muddied the waters of the case. When it was determined that there was enough evidence for the case to go to trial, Bosie insisted that he and Oscar go on holiday to Monte Carlo. Despite his mounting legal bills, Oscar went, and they both sold off jewelry to afford the trip. Bosie lost most of his money gambling, and Oscar returned to England to a £500 legal bill he had to ask friends to help him pay. Many close to him advised Wilde to drop the case and go to the continent with Constance while the feud blew over. Queensberry planned to use both Wilde and his son's literature as evidence against them. Even worse, the opposing side had gathered many of the young men Oscar had trysts with over the past 3 years, several of whom were going to testify. He was shocked and knew he was in an impossible situation. If he dropped the case, he could be prosecuted for falsely accusing Queensberry of libel. If he escaped to Europe, it would make him look guilty. Oscar felt it would be a blight to his honor to capitulate to Queensberry or to leave England, so he persisted. The trial began on April 3, 1895, and things started off well for Oscar. He testified with confidence and humor, causing the crowd to erupt in laughter numerous times. When his literature was brought up, he refuted the homoerotic undertones of his work, including the love letter he wrote to Bosie and reformed into a sonnet. However, things took a turn when his affairs with rent boys were mentioned. He could not deny the numerous witness statements Queensberry and his lawyers had compiled. He also incriminated himself when he denied kissing a young man because he was plain. The lawyer jumped on this, stating that Oscar only refused to kiss him because he thought the man was ugly, not because he was a heterosexual. One critical aspect of Wilde's defense was not included in his case: Bosie. Though he was eager to testify and defend him, Oscar insisted that he should not be drawn into the trial. Ultimately, he realized he could not win without Bosie's testimony. Instead, his lawyers withdrew the case. Lord Alfred Douglas was extremely anxious to go into the box, but I would not let him do so. Rather than put him in so painful a position, I determined rather to retire from the case and to bear on my own shoulders whatever ignominy and shame might result from my prosecuting Lord Queensberry. These decisions had major consequences. Queensberry's lawyers sent the witness statements and the trial transcripts to prosecutors. Had he known the mountain of evidence Queensberry had on him, it is likely he would have rethought pressing charges. Oscar's arrest was imminent. The fallout led to a stark drop in attendance at Oscar's plays, and his name was removed from marquees across the city. Constance begged Ross to convince Oscar to leave the country, but he believed it was too late and that he was now being watched. Bosie went to the House of Commons to beg for mercy on behalf of Oscar. He was told that though a warrant for his arrest had been issued, it would be delayed until the last train for Dover left London that night. The authorities were giving Oscar the opportunity to escape to France, but Oscar would not take it. He was going to face his fate, whatever it may bring. When Ross informed Oscar a warrant was out for his arrest, Wilde went very gray. Oscar was arrested, charged with gross indecency, and denied bail. Witnesses were given immunity to testify against him. His legal team represented him pro bono in the trial. While in jail, his health and appearance rapidly declined under the stress of his plight. If convicted, Bosie said he would buy a house next to the prison Oscar was held in so he could visit him every day. He did not face prosecution, as the police said there was less evidence, and they believed that he was less culpable for the affair since Wilde was the older man who corrupted him. His aristocratic background may have also helped him avoid prison time. Oscar's trial began on April 26th at the Old Bailey. His attorneys tried to discredit the rent boys by claiming that they were thieves and liars. The most dramatic point of the trial occurred when Oscar was asked about a line in one of Bosie's poems, Two Loves. What is the love that dare not speak its name? The love that dare not speak its name, in this century, is such a great affection of an elder for a younger man as there was between David and Jonathan, such as Plato made the very basis of his philosophy, and such as you find in the sonnets of Michelangelo and Shakespeare. It is that deep, spiritual affection that is as pure as it is perfect. It dictates and pervades great works of art, like those of Shakespeare and Michelangelo, and those two letters of mine, such as they are. It is in this century misunderstood, so much misunderstood that it may be described as the love that dare not speak its name, and on account of it I am placed where I am now. It is beautiful, it is fine, it is the noblest form of affection. There is nothing unnatural about it. It is intellectual, and it repeatedly exists between an elder and a younger man, when the elder man has intellect, and the younger man has all the joy, hope, and glamour of life before him. That it should be so, the world does not understand. The world mocks at it, and sometimes puts one in the pillory for it. Most of the crowd applauded his grand and heartfelt speech, but some hissed at him. In an ideal world, this impassioned appeal would have vindicated Oscar and led to his acquittal. However, in reality, the jury was unmoved, believing that his speech did not excuse him from his behavior with the rent boys. After the trial concluded and the jury deliberated, Oscar was not optimistic, and wrote to Bosie, "My dearest boy, this is to assure you of my immortal, my eternal love for you. Tomorrow all will be over. If prison and dishonor be my destiny, think that my love for you and this idea, this still more divine belief, that you love me in return, will sustain me in my unhappiness, and will make me capable, I hope, of bearing my grief most patiently." The first trial ended in a hung jury. He was released from prison May 7th, and Queensberry stalked him from hotel to hotel, convinced that Bosie was with him. He was presented yet another opportunity to flee, but Oscar was stubborn, and he did not want to lose his dignity by running away. His mother didn't help matters, telling him, "If you stay, even if you go to prison, you will always be my son. It will make no difference to my affection. But if you go, I will never speak to you again." It may have been that Oscar felt it was the final duty of a true artist to succumb to a final downfall. A friend said, he felt vaguely that the life journey of a genius would be incomplete and farcical without the final tragedy. Whoever lives the highest must be crucified. The new trial began on May 22nd, contained much of the same witness statements and evidence, and received less media coverage than the first. Oscar was found guilty on all but one of the 8 charges brought against him. He was sentenced to 2 years' hard labor, the harshest possible punishment. The courtroom was shocked at the severity of the sentence, especially Oscar, who tried to address the judge, but was taken away before he could utter a word. Oscar summed up his 2 years in prison in 3 words: hunger, insomnia, disease. He was isolated from the other prisoners and barely had anyone to talk to. While in the prison yard one day, a fellow inmate told him he was sorry for what he went through. Oscar outstretched his hands in gratitude. He received harsh punishment for this. He was also forced to take bromide potassium, a sedative intended to suppress his libido. Due to his diminishing health, Oscar was given lighter labor. He became ill with dysentery at one point and was losing his hearing and eyesight. He was transferred several times, eventually serving out the remainder of his sentence at Reading Jail. He later reflected, "To those who are in prison, tears are a part of every day's experience." Constance took the children to Europe, changing their last name to Holland. She did visit Oscar in prison and hinted at the possibility of the two of them eventually reconciling. She ultimately decided not to divorce Oscar, though many believed she should. She planned to give him an allowance of £200 a year upon his release from prison, which was contingent on him never seeing Bosie again. Bosie fled to Europe to avoid arrest and public scrutiny in England. He was devoted to Bosie at the time of his imprisonment, but as it wore on, Oscar began to feel deep resentment for him. Bosie took it upon himself to defend Oscar and homosexuality, mainly in the French literary magazine Mercure de France. He became even more unpopular in his homeland when he claimed that many prominent men were hypocrites. At Oxford, where I suppose you would admit one is likely to find the pick of the youth of England, I knew hundreds who had these tastes among the undergraduates, not to mention a slight sprinkling of dons, meaning professors. When Wilde heard of Bosie's writings in prison, he was mortified. There is no need that Bosie of all men should for his own vanity make it more hideous. When Ross informed him that Bosie was writing a book of poems dedicated to him, he asked Ross to stop him, calling it revolting and grotesque. Oscar came to blame Bosie for his plight. Though he also lacked discretion in his activities with other men, he felt that Bosie was the one who compelled him to pursue criminal charges against his father. Oscar believed he got caught in the crossfire of the father-son rivalry and hated Bosie for it. In early 1897, he began writing a letter outlining his grievances with Bosie, later referred to as De Profundis, or From the Depths. He painted Bosie as a spoiled and extravagant child who had brought him into the gutter with him. Though he claimed to forgive him, it was clear he was harboring intense resentment towards Bosie, and took to writing to vent his rage and despair. Oscar did acknowledge the silver lining of his prison sentence, stating it had made him a more empathetic, less selfish person. He intended for De Profundis to be published after both he and Bosie were dead, and entrusted it with Ross after his release from prison in May of 1897. Ross may have sent a copy to Douglas, but Bosie claims he never read it until several years after Oscar's death. It is possible he read some of it when Ross sent it to him, then threw it in the River Marne in a rage. De Profundis would have a lasting impact on Bosie's life and legacy in the decades to come. Though his ordeal was finally over, it would impact what little time left Oscar had to live. Constance said, "I think Oscar's face is rather like Humpty Dumpty's, quite as tragic and quite as impossible to put right." Still, upon his release, Oscar was in better health and spirits than most expected him to be. He left for France, and while he and Constance remained married, they were separated and would never live together again. She did follow through on her promise to provide him with an allowance, which came to £150 a year. This money was vital to Oscar's ability to live, as his plays were no longer being staged, he struggled to rehabilitate his professional reputation, and dealt with writer's block. It did not take long for Bosie to beg to see Oscar again. When he refused, Bosie became angry, calling him unfair and ungrateful, and believing that the trauma of imprisonment had caused his reluctance to meet up with him. However, it was far more complex than that. Oscar had to stay away from Bosie in order to receive his money from Constance. Still, he wrote him, reassuring him, "My dear boy, don't think I don't love you. Of course I love you more than anyone else. And every day I think of you, and I know you are a poet, and that makes you doubly dear and wonderful." Still, they couldn't stay away from each other for long. They planned to meet at an earlier date, but word somehow got out. His attorneys warned him, and he canceled the meeting for fear of Constance finding out. On August 18, 1897, the lovers finally reunited in Rouen. Bosie was on his best behavior and very sweet. Ross wrote to Oscar to voice his objections. He replied, "Yes, I saw Bosie, and of course I love him as I always did, with a sense of tragedy and ruin." He referred to their reunion as psychologically inevitable. By September, they went to Naples together, first staying at a hotel that they paid for on credit. At this critical point, Constance, who was struggling with her health, wrote to Oscar asking him to come visit her. This would have been a huge step in reuniting him with his children. However, Oscar refused, believing it was too late. He went all in with Bosie and felt he could not turn back. He was also offended by the timing of the letter, which came in September when their sons were back in school, and he would not be able to see them. He told her he would visit her at some point. Their son Vivian said that Constance was very upset when Oscar refused her invitation. She was enraged when she found out he was living with Bosie. I forbid you to see Lord Alfred Douglas. I forbid you to return to your filthy, insane life. I forbid you to live in Naples. I will not allow you to come to Genoa." Oscar was unrepentant, assuring her he would not visit if he was unwanted, and that he had no plans of changing his behavior. She viewed him as a madman, unconcerned with how his behavior was impacting his children or his wife. She was done with him. "I suppose she will now try to deprive me of my wretched £3 a week. Women are so petty, and Constance has no imagination," Oscar wrote. His reignited devotion to Bosie did not only anger Constance. Many of his friends who had supported him throughout his imprisonment were fed up, but Oscar didn't care. "Whatever my life may have been ethically, it has always been romantic, and Bosie is my romance. My romance is a tragedy, of course, but it is nonetheless a romance, and he loves me very dearly, more than he loves or can love anyone else, and without him my life was dreary." They eventually rented a rat-infested villa in Posillipo and attempted to focus on their writing. However, lack of funds caused strain in the relationship. Oscar lost his allowance from Constance, and though Bosie was still receiving his allowance, it was not enough for both of them, especially considering their shared taste for luxury. Bosie's family also did not want him to stay with Oscar. As the months wore on, it was clear that the love that had bonded them together through thick and thin was dissipating. Neither one of them was ready to admit it yet, given the immense sacrifices each of them had to make to be together. To speed things along, Bosie purposefully said nasty things to Oscar and threw things at him to force him to end the relationship. At one point, Bosie asked Oscar what he meant by one of his writings, "Each man kills the things he loves." Oscar replied, "You should know." The final blow to the relationship was dealt when Lady Queensberry threatened to cut off her son's allowance. This was their only lifeline, and even with this money, they were still dining in hotels on credit. Bosie and Oscar mutually agreed to part ways. Bosie realized it would really be a relief to him if I went away. He asked his mother to pay Oscar £500 to compensate him for everything that happened. Lady Queensberry agreed to pay him £200 if they both promised they would never live together again. She paid their hotel bills as well. Bosie left for Rome in the first week of December, saying he had a clear conscience. Oscar remained in Naples, wrestling with writer's block. "My life has gone to great ruin here, and I have no brain now or energy." In February of 1898, Oscar moved to Paris and published a poem about his imprisonment, The Ballad of Reading Jail. It was a success in England and helped increase his cash flow. Still, he was struggling to support himself. Luckily, after separating from Bosie, Constance reinstated his allowance. He viewed Paris as a fresh start and expected to be received with open arms as he had in the past during his glory days, believing the city to be more open to homosexuality than England. However, he was disappointed. He was dealt another blow when on April 7th, Constance died. In addition to her sudden and tragic death, Oscar lost all hope of ever seeing his children again. They were sent to live with her cousin, who was unwilling to allow him to see his sons. Bosie visited him in Paris, often in the presence of other friends and chaperones, but the intensity of their relationship had dwindled, and the pair were content to remain friends. Oscar still patronized rent boys. Bosie returned to England after 3.5 years in exile. On the 31st of January 1900, the Marquess of Queensberry died. He converted to Catholicism on his deathbed, and though he had tried to reconcile with his son soon before his death, he remained estranged from Bosie to the end. Surprisingly, Bosie was not disinherited and was in a far better financial situation than he had ever been. Before spending all of his money on boys, brandy, and betting, he helped Oscar pay off some of his legal debts, which he had promised his family would pay for years earlier. When Oscar asked him for a steady allowance, Bosie descended into one of his famous rages, calling him an old fat prostitute. They dined together at the Grand Café in August of 1900. Oscar told Bosie he had a premonition that he would not live out the first year of the 20th century. Bosie brushed this comment off as Oscar being overly dramatic. Oscar's health was taking a turn for the worse. That summer, he began experiencing frequent headaches that grew increasingly painful. In October, he saw a physician who found that he had an ear infection that spread. He was told he needed surgery immediately or he would die. The procedure was successful, but very expensive, and Oscar said he was dying above his means. By the end of the month, he seemed to have recovered and began going out again, and drinking, which doctors had forbidden him to do. When Ross came to visit, he implored him to stop. Oscar replied, "And what do I have to live for, Robbie?" He asked Ross to send for a priest if he was dying so he could convert to Catholicism. By November, the headaches had resumed. The infection spread to Oscar's brain. There was nothing the doctors could do. He was given morphine to ease his pain, and often drifted into delirium. When Ross arrived at his bedside on November 29th, he followed through on his promise and got him a priest. Oscar was baptized and received into the Catholic Church one day before his death. Ross sent Bosie a telegram informing him that Oscar was dying. He succumbed to the infection on November 30th, 1900. Upon his death, a journalist wrote that nothing he ever wrote had the strength to endure. Robbie Ross took control of Wilde's body of work and legacy, and the writer's reputation was rehabilitated within less than a decade of his death. Productions of his plays resumed in Europe and the United States, and several biographies were published. One of these published part of De Profundis and was critical of Bosie, but did not name him outright, calling him Oscar's friend. Bosie ended up in court, suing the author for defamation. The letter was read aloud in court, marking the first time Bosie heard it in full, to his great humiliation. Bosie married a woman and had one child. He blew his inheritance on a life of luxury, and though he married into money, he found himself penniless again in time. He eventually converted to Catholicism and turned on homosexuality and Oscar, claiming he had an evil influence over his life, that his works were overrated, even going as far as to say that Oscar was the greatest force of evil that has appeared in Europe in the last 300 years. He made anti-Semitic remarks for which he was imprisoned for libel for 6 months in the 1920s. He eventually reversed his harsh feelings towards Oscar and homosexuality. He died in 1945, bankrupt. The passion that bound Oscar and Bosie together tore them apart and left their lives in ruins, especially Oscar's. Yet even after the fire that burnt brightly between them fizzled out, a deep love and respect remained. While Oscar's reputation has been rehabilitated, Bosie is still portrayed as a selfish, destructive force in Wilde's life, despite his efforts to help his lover and friend. His relationship with Oscar casts a shadow over his work as a poet and writer, and would haunt the rest of his life and his legacy. They committed the sin of being open with their love in an unjust and unforgiving time. Certainly Bosie was immature and flawed, but he also cared deeply for Oscar and tried to help him during his darkest hour. His rivalry with his father went too far and brought Oscar down with him. In 1938, Bosie reflected, "The thought which has only recently occurred to me is a terrible one. Did my father really love me all the time, as I certainly loved him before he turned against me? And was he only doing what Oscar says in his great ballad, All Men Always Do, killing the thing he loved? Didn't we all three, Wilde, my father, and I, do it, more or less?" Thank you very much for watching. I'm the Affair Archivist. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And join me next time as we uncover another unforgettable affair from history.